Thank you very much, Camilla, and thank you everyone for joining and to look at these amazing results and discuss them with us afterwards. And I just wanted to remind everyone, send in your questions. We are so happy to discuss them later on. So as Camilla said, I'm Anna Hoffmann-Wold. I'm a rheumatologist working in Oslo and Zurich, and I do a lot of research on CTD, ILD, so interstitial lung disease and rheumatic diseases, but I also see patients in clinics. And just to start with, this has been an amazing journey to be part of the steering committee for Fibroneer, for the Fibroneer studies. And even more seeing the results, this was really, really exciting for all of us. So what I think is important to understand, what is very specific for rheumatic disease patients, which you will always hear when you talk to rheumatologists, is that rheumatic diseases are multi-organ diseases. They hardly never only affect the lung. And they can literally affect every organ. So what is important also, especially to understand the questions you will get from rheumatologists, is that many of our patients across all rheumatic diseases have gastrointestinal involvement. They can also have some inflammatory organ involvements such as arthritis. They can have myositis, vasculitis. They can have digital ulcers. There are many different organ manifestations. And that is important when we talk about the side effects later on, to put the trial data into context and also questions you will receive and what is important for us. Very important, lung involvement, and especially interstitial lung disease, is frequent in all of our diseases. And there is a very nice meta-analysis which looked at 237 patients and looked at how often do our patients with rheumatic diseases develop interstitial lung disease. And you can see the prevalences vary, but it's really present in all of our patients. So this is why it's so important that studies like the Fibroneer ILD included all kinds of patients, because, which I will come back to a little bit later, often we have also trials which includes one disease, and they're mainly systemic sclerosis. But for us, it is really important that all of our patients get the chance to get included, because most of them have interstitial lung disease possibility to development. And then what is very important also, again, for later on, to put the trial data into context, mortality is increased in our patients really by the pure presence of interstitial lung disease. And you can see here the red line, these are systemic sclerosis patients from the nationwide Norwegian cohort who had interstitial lung disease, compared to patients who did not have interstitial lung disease. And you see the curves very early diverge. So that means just the presence of interstitial lung disease is associated with mortality. So it's a really severe organ manifestation, which we all take very serious. And then, of course, why also this trial is so important, because it assessed, as you have heard from all the other speakers, progressive pulmonary fibrosis. And that is important to understand, that that is also a subgroup of patients which is present in all of our rheumatic disease patients. And you can see here, despite any of the definitions we can apply for progressive pulmonary fibrosis, so like FVC decline, which is included or was the primary endpoint as in the trial, or even a combined endpoint of progressive pulmonary fibrosis, all our patients have a subgroup who will progress over a 1-year period. So these results, or this subtype of patient, is really important for us too. And why it is so important is because once these patients progress, it is even more associated with reduced survival compared to just the mere presence of ILD. And that is, again, also important when we discuss the data of the Fibroneer ILD trial. And then the last context, which I would like to show you quickly before we look at why it is, why the results of Fibroneer ILD are so important for rheumatologists as well, is that the treatment of our patients is very important, but very few randomized trials have been conducted in the past. So a lot of what we do in clinical practice to date is not based on real high evidence data coming from RCTs, but more or less experience. And that is, of course, super important and a difference. And this is showing you some data from systemic sclerosis, where most of the randomized trials are coming from, where you can see that our patients are much more treated to date than before. So when you look here in 2007, only 14% of all patients received immunosuppression, while now after 2016, it's 57%. So a majority of our patients are treated at this time point. And this is important when we discuss a little bit the background treatment also, which was allowed in FIBRONEER-ILD. Another very important point, and this is also why we are so glad that our patients with rheumatic diseases also are included in FIBRONEER-ILD, is that we rheumatologists are really good in adapting our treatment approaches based on available data. Such as here you can see the mycophenolate data, where very few patients were treated with mycophenolate before the Scleroderma Lung Study 2, which assessed mycophenolate compared to cyclophosphamide, was published. And after the publication, you can see here in pink, the number of patients really increased. So rheumatologists, when we believe in a drug, when we see data from a trial, really implement that in clinical practice. And I think this is also important for you to understand when you talk to a rheumatologist, or if you want to understand how we think. And to date, what I already told you is that very few randomized trials exist of drugs we are using and which also are included in guidelines. So here you can see these are the ECHS guidelines. We are awaiting all the ERS-EULAR guidelines, which hopefully will be published in a month or two. But to date, we have the ECHS guidelines. And I marked all the drugs which are included in the guideline. And then I marked the ones in red who are really based on RCTs. And you can see, as I said, for systemic sclerosis, most of the drugs which are included in the guideline, this is first-line treatment, have been tested in randomized trials. When you look at the other diseases, very few of the drugs included patients with rheumatic diseases in RCTs. So again, highlighting how many drugs we use which are not from the highest level of evidence, meaning RCTs. And this is why we are so glad that now FIBRONEER-ILD, again, for nerandomilast, included our patients. For progressive pulmonary fibrosis, so for second-line treatment, you can see it's even less data available coming from RCTs. So here, only nintedanib was really assessed in a randomized clinical trial, including our patients and being implemented in a guideline. So that again highlights the huge importance of the FIBRONEER-ILD trial also for the future when we talk about treatment guidelines. So now putting this background into context of the FIBRONEER-ILD trial. So first, you saw this already from Madhu, and also Marlies mentioned it, that a large subgroup of patients included in this trial had autoimmune ILD, so meaning rheumatic disease. Patients not treated with background nintedanib for 32% and treated with nintedanib 22%, also highlighting that we don't use as much nintedanib yet in patients with rheumatic disease. And then also a little bit back to the immunosuppression, and you have seen this both from Madhu and Susanna. A lot of immunosuppressants which we use in rheumatic diseases were excluded. But the ones who were allowed, you can see these were equally distributed between the placebo, nerandomilast 9 and 18 milligram group. And this is also important for us rheumatologists that something was allowed. Of course, not the major drugs which we use, but at least other immunosuppressants were allowed. And then this is, again, what you have seen, the primary endpoint for all of the entire subgroup. And you have seen this enough, so I just jump over. And what I want to highlight is that when you look at the subgroup again, and here I highlighted the rheumatic or the autoimmune ILDs, you can see the efficacy was in the same range as the entire cohort and also all the other subgroups in the 9 milligram and also in the 18 milligram. So that again was super exciting for me as a rheumatologist, and will be super exciting for all my colleagues internationally, that the difference is not significant between the subgroups, including the patients we take care of. And then what is even more exciting, especially when you remember the data, I showed you that the mere presence of ILD and also progressive ILD is associated with mortality, is that the secondary endpoint of death is also, again, significantly reduced. So this is really exciting for us, also what you already heard from Marlies. And this is also very exciting for us rheumatologists. And when we look at the subgroup, because this is again the entire population, no, sorry, you can also see that it's across both doses. And then a little bit to the side effects, because this is already what I told you. Rheumatologists are very, very interested in side effects. And especially we are interested in side effects which also may add up to other organ manifestations. And I already highlighted that gastrointestinal disease is a major complication for a lot of our patients. And when we see here that diarrhea adverse events leading to treatment discontinuation was very minor across all or both groups compared to placebo, that is really, really exciting for us and makes it much easier to also implement nerandomilast across our rheumatic disease patients. And again, here you see the different complications possible, and again diarrhea is on top, but not that much as compared to placebo, which again is really important to highlight when you talk to rheumatologists. So take-home messages for me as a rheumatologist for the FIBRONEER-ILD trial is that we know that our rheumatic diseases are multi-organ diseases, frequently assessing the lung, which was here the primary endpoint. It's frequently progressive, which is associated with reduced survival, and therefore we are so happy that our patients were included in the trial, because we do have a lot of patients who are progressive, and that the key secondary endpoint was positive, including survival, because we are very worried for our patients which have a high mortality once they have ILD, and even higher mortality when these patients progress over time. So that is really something which is important to highlight when you talk to rheumatologists, because we are worried for our patients. We're also very happy that we finally get another randomized trial adding to INBUILD, where patients with autoimmune ILDs were included, and now we have treatment efficacy for nerandomilast in our patients. The second RCT, including a broad spectrum of patients with rheumatic diseases. That is really exciting and needs to be highlighted talking to other rheumatologists as well. And again, thank you very much to Boehringer Ingelheim to really include our patients, include rheumatologists now in the steering committee, and also letting us talk to colleagues and highlight the nice results of this trial. I really hope and want to highlight again, please post your questions. We are so happy to discuss them, and I give the word back to Camilla.